to offer you this lesson from Unity of the Keys Spiritual Center.
Jesus of Nazareth, an itinerant Jewish preacher, was asked by the scribes and the Pharisees of his time to give them a sign so that they might believe in him. But the only sign he reluctantly gave them, while calling them an evil and adulterous generation, was the sign of the prophet Jonah. Jesus is quoted as saying that both the people of Nineveh, which is one of the most hated people, one of the most despicable, according to the Jews, of the non-Jewish cities. So the people of Nineveh and the queen of the south, the head of the ancient goddess tradition, will rise up in judgment against this generation. That's what he said. And will condemn it. So apparently, in solidarity with the oppressed and the persecuted, and the worshipers of the many forms of the indigenous traditions, in his time, even the queen herself, Jesus proclaimed the message of Jonah, which is a message ultimately, as you will see, of peace, liberation, and justice for all people and within each one of us. The word Jonah means dove in Hebrew. It's a universal archetype for the divine feminine, the pregnant virgin, and a symbol for Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. I believe this was Jesus' way of saying that he embodied a radically different image of God than the fire and brimstone God, which many Christians still worship today. Jesus taught God was a Boon de Boashmaya, the great birther, who lives and moves and loves through us. In fact, he's quoted as saying that God is like a mother hen gathering her chicks under her wing. That's Matthew 23:37 and Luke 13:34. God is a loving, protecting, nurturing presence, bringing forth new life in us and all around us. A contemporary prophet who passed recently in his late 90s, Roy Eugene Davis, described God as an enlivening power, nurturing the universe, and he said, we can learn to cooperate with it. The keys to cooperation and attunement with this enlivening presence are contained in the story of Jonah and his evolution from angry, zealous, and self-righteous prophet to a spirituality of compassion and forgiveness and love for himself and everyone else. The book of Jonah is unique in all the prophetic books because it's not a book of prophetic visions and apocalyptic messages of doom and gloom in the future if we don't mend our ways. But it's a finely constructed prose narrative about the prophet Jonah himself and his resistance to following the will of God. Actually, it's a big fish story. But it's not about the fish that keeps getting bigger and bigger that got away. It's about the guy who got away from the fish. And there actually was a Jonah that was a prophet in 750 BCE. But the story itself was written 300 years later, at a time when the nation of Israel needed to open up and was facing a lot of challenge, a lot of conflict, because they were not accepting of other tribes and traditions. And so the story was told to inspire them and to guide them to a higher vision of God. So I thought it would be good to review this story because it's very similar to the conflict we're going through in our country. In Act 1, we have Jonah, the reluctant Messiah. "Go at once to Nineveh," said God, "that great city, and tell them to mend their ways. They are being wicked, and I will destroy that nation if they do not change." Jonah refused to go to Nineveh. Where do you think he went? Or what do you think he did? He did. He hopped a boat in the opposite direction. And it was so bad after he did that in the sea that a great storm came upon and almost lost the ship he was on. And so the sailors cast lots, which was their way of trying to understand what was going on. And Jonah got the short end of the stick. So they said, "Hey, Jonah, what's the problem here?" He said, "Yeah, I'm a prophet of God, but I refuse to do what God asked me to do." And they felt that if they left Jonah on the boat, that the whole boat would sink. Have you ever experienced that? When one person or one part of yourself is so negative that it's going to take you down or take your community down or just affect you in such a negative way that, you have to do something about it. And they didn't want to throw Jonah overboard, but they did. And everything calmed down. And Jonah was caught by a fish. And Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of that whale and 3 nights in the belly of that whale, in that deep, dark, dank, lonely place we call the dark night of the soul. Has anyone ever experienced that? When you feel like you are just sucked into a dark place of confusion where nobody loves you and you don't like anything in your life and you feel that God has totally forsaken you. That's that experience of being in the belly of the whale. But after 3 days and 3 nights, Jonah comes to his senses and he begins to sing. In Hebrew culture, prayers were sung. One can only imagine what Jonah's voice might have sounded like in the belly of that whale, but he had a beautiful prayer. And even though he was feeling that he was cast into the deep, he said, "God, there's nowhere I know I can go that will be away from your sight. And I pray that one day I again will look at your holy temple. The waters closed over me and the deep surrounded me, and I am here, but I believe that life is good and love is the answer. And I send my prayer to you, God, with thanksgiving. Even though I'm here in this belly of the whale, I want you to know that I give everything to you, and I vow to do as you ask. And I know that you, God, my connection with you, that is my deliverance. That is my answer to all things." So the whale spit Jonah out. And guess where he landed? No. On dry land, right where he started. So there's a little lesson in that for us too. We can kick and we can scream and we can do the geographical cure and we can try to hop a boat, but we will take ourselves with us wherever we go. And when we finally come to our senses, we'll be right back where we started. So what do you think Jonah does then? He hears God's voice saying, okay, Jonah, go to Nineveh. And he has a second chance, and he goes to Nineveh. He goes, and his preaching is so strong that the entire city of Nineveh, the entire nation of people, they change. They put on sackcloth, they put ashes on their forehead, and they pray for forgiveness, and they ask God to show them the way to be a holy city. God is stoked. He forgives them immediately. And Jonah is so mad. Jonah actually sets up his tent to overlook the destruction of the city. Even though these people have mended their ways, Jonah wants them to be punished. This part of our personality is really difficult to put into words. We really don't have a word for it in English. In Sanskrit, it is mudita, the ability to have happiness for other people's success, the ability to actually find joy in another person's achievement. Jonah had to cultivate that kind of consciousness because Jonah represents, at this stage of his development, the extreme anger and self-righteousness that comes from thinking that you know what's best for everyone else, that you know right from wrong, good for bad, and that you can predict and blame, and that you can judge other people and yourself. Jonah actually goes off and pouts, but God, having compassion on Jonah, sends him a bush to shield his little head from the sun. Jonah loves the bush. But still, Jonah waits, hoping that ill will happen to the nation. And so God sends a worm to smite the bush, which sends Jonah over the edge. He wants to die. And then God makes his point. Jonah, if you feel so wretched because a bush died that shaded your little head, and you didn't even plan it or care for it, how do you think I feel about losing an entire nation of people and all those animals and plants that are so dear to me? So the message of Jonah, the sign that Jesus was trying to give us, is to cultivate kindness, compassion, and joy in other people's success. The path of Jonah is expressed in the Bhagavad Gita. I look at all creatures equally. None are less dear to me, and none are more dear to me. To truly love and serve God is to cultivate a heart of unselfish joy, kindness, patience, sharing in other people's happiness, generous appreciation and gratitude for other people's achievements. Love one another as I have loved you. That's how people will know you're my friends, Jesus said. So we have a new commandment. Thou shalt not criticize or condemn others. We must become unwavering in our capacity to forgive ourselves for our mistakes and everyone else. The people of Nineveh represent all of our unacceptable character flaws, all of the annoying tendencies in our family members and other people that make us want to run, or hide or criticize or blame them. But the true spiritual friend says, bring it on. There is no place to go. We take ourselves with us anyway. So love and accept all your imperfections, all your mistakes, and everyone else. Any ill will directed at others will only cause storms and suffering in our own deep, dark belly of the whale. Look for the blessing. Call it forth. Keep your mind stayed on God, like Jonah did in the whale, on good, on gratitude. Nothing in us or about us or anyone else is unworthy of loving. The Tao Te Ching says this: the spiritual path is easy for those who have no preferences. That, in a nutshell, is the sign of Jonah.